Hello, I'm Carlton Van Putten, founder and CEO of PayRent. Welcome to the Keys to Success podcast, where we unlock the secrets to smarter investments, smoother tenant management, and bigger profits, one episode at a time. Ready to master your property game? Let's dive in.
Welcome to Keys to Success, where we unlock the essentials for smart property management.
Helping you turn those properties into profit.
Okay, let's talk about something that causes, well, a lot of stress for landlords. You've got your property, you've found what seems like a good tenant, things are running smoothly.
And then bam, rent day comes and goes. Silence.
Exactly. That sinking feeling when the rent just doesn't show up. It's a moment pretty much every property owner dreads.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the toughest parts of the job. That uncertainty, maybe a bit of panic, it happens, even to experienced landlords.
For sure. And figuring out what to do next legally and effectively, that's crucial. That's what we're focusing on today. We've been looking at this really practical guide called When the Rent Stops, a landlord's guide.
Yeah, it's a solid resource. It lays out the steps pretty clearly for handling non-payment. So our plan is to walk through this guide, pull out the key actions, the insights, and maybe most importantly, the warnings.
The things that can save you time, money, and serious legal headaches down the road. Think of this as getting the roadmap you need when that rent payment goes missing.
Right. Because, as the guide points out, this isn't just, a casual oversight sometimes. It's often technically a breach of the lease agreement.
And it needs a calm, methodical approach, not flying off the handle.
Definitely not. The guide really stresses that being prepared, having a process, is your best defense.
And it says that preparation starts way before the rent is even late, right? With the lease itself.
It really does. The guide makes it crystal clear. Your lease is the foundation. When things go wrong, that document is your rule book.
So not just something you sign and file away.
Not at all. The source highlights that you need absolutely clear terms in there. Things like, obviously, the rent amount, the exact due date, how they can pay checks online, what the late fees are, if there's a grace period.
I mean, what that grace period actually means.
Exactly. And the specific procedure if payment is late. The guide says you need to spell it all out.
So just saying, rent's due on the 1st isn't quite enough. You need the details. Like, what if the 1st is a Sunday or a holiday?
Precisely. What about mail delays if they send a check? All those little what ifs. The guide says get specific now to avoid arguments later.
Because any late payment, the guide defines it as a breach of contract, full stop.
Yep. And a key piece of advice from the source. Pull out your current lease template right now. If it's vague on any of these points, grace periods, late fees, how holidays are handled, fix it. Update that template now for future tenants.
Don't wait for the problem to bite you again.
Don't wait. Proactive is the word.
Okay, so you've got a solid lease, but, things still happen. Rent is late. You've double-checked your lease terms. What's the guide's absolute next step? The non-negotiable one.
Step 1, according to the guide, and this is huge, now you're result.
Yep.
Before you do almost anything else.
Because it's not the same everywhere.
Not even close. The guide really emphasizes this. Landlord-tenant laws vary massively, state to state, city to city, even county to county sometimes.
Wow. Okay. So assuming the rules are the same as, say, the next town over could be a mistake.
A big one. The guide warns about this strongly. In many places, you legally have to give the tenant specific written notices before you can even think about starting a formal eviction. Things like a formal late rent notice, or what's often called a pay or quit notice.
Explain that pay or quit notice. What is it exactly?
The guide describes it as a formal legal document. It tells the tenant you have X number of days, and that number is set by your local law, could be 3 days, 7 days, whatever, to either pay the full amount you owe, including any late fees, or move out.
So it's the official warning shot.
It's often the required first step before you can file with the court. It puts them on formal notice.
And if you skip it, or you maybe fill it out wrong based on your local rules.
Big trouble. The guide is very clear here. Your whole eviction case could get thrown out by the judge. You'd have to start all over again. More time lost, more rent lost. Yeah. And worst case, the guide warns you could even be sued by the tenant for not following the proper legal procedure. So yeah, step 1, Learn your local laws intimately.
Okay, lesson 1, tight lease. Lesson 2.
Know the local law. Cold. Got those down. What's the guide say is next?
Step 2, and this is one people often skip in the heat of the moment, communicate, talk to the tenant immediately.
Really? Before the scary legal notices?
Yes. The guide calls this your first and cheapest tool. Pick up the phone, send a text, before assuming the worst.
Why? What's the thinking there?
Because, honestly, there are lots of reasons rent might be late that aren't like a disaster brewing. The guide lists a few. Maybe they genuinely forgot. Maybe an auto pay failed. Maybe they lost their job suddenly or had a medical issue.
Or even something simple like the guide's example about Daniel, the property manager.
Yeah, that was a great illustration. His tenant just forgot to update their auto pay after getting a new bank card. A quick call, problem solved, rent paid same day. No drama.
So communication first. It can save a lot of hassle. It really can. It gives them a chance to explain, lets you figure out what's actually going on, and sometimes that's all it takes.
Okay, but let's say you've called, you've texted, maybe emailed, the grace period in the lease is over, and still no rent. What's the guide say is the required formal step now?
Step 3. Send a formal late rent notice. This is crucial if the rent is still unpaid after any grace period you allow.
And this isn't just another email reminder, right? This is different.
Definitely different. The guide stresses this needs to be an official document. It has to be specific.
What does it need to include?
According to the source, the exact amount owed, any late fees calculated according to the lease, a clear reference to the lease clause about rent payment, and very importantly, a firm deadline for when the payment must be made to avoid further action.
And why is this formality so important?
A couple of reasons. First, like we said, it's often a legal requirement before you can even file for eviction in court. Second, it creates a paper trail. It's dated, written proof that you officially notified them about the debt. That documentation is gold if things escalate.
Okay, communication tried, formal notice sent. Maybe the tenant responds, they're apologetic, they want to stay, but they just can't pay it all at once. The guide offers an option here, right? Step 4.
It does. Step 4 is considering a payment plan. This is an option the guide suggests exploring if the tenant is cooperative and you think it's a viable business decision.
So, not for every situation, but maybe for a good tenant who hit a temporary snag.
Exactly. But if you do go this route, the guide is adamant. Get everything in writing. No verbal agreements on this.
What needs to be in that written agreement?
Define the exact payment schedule, how much they'll pay, and when each installment is due. And be crystal clear about the consequences if they miss a payment on this new plan. Defaulting on the payment plan usually means you proceed immediately with the next step, likely eviction.
The guide had a practical tip here too, didn't it?
Yeah, suggesting automatic bank withdrawals if possible. Helps ensure the payments happen on schedule.
Makes sense. And the benefit of doing this?
The big one the guide points out is avoiding court. Evictions cost money, take time. A payment plan, if it works, keeps some cash flowing and avoids those legal fees and delays. It can be a win-win if the tenant is genuinely committed.
Okay, that's one possible detour from the eviction path. The guide has another, maybe more surprising one in step 5. Cash for keys. Sounds weird, right? Paying someone who owes you money?
It absolutely sounds backwards.
Yeah.
But the guide pushes you to think about it purely as a business decision, not an emotional one.
Okay, sell me on the business logic. How does paying them help me?
It's about cutting your losses and speeding things up. The guide explains that offering the tenant a lump sum, maybe a few $100, maybe more, depending in exchange for them voluntarily moving out by a set date, leaving the place clean.
Can save you more in the long run.
Potentially, yes. Think about it. A formal eviction can take weeks, even months. You're paying court fees, maybe lawyer fees, and getting zero rent that whole time. Cash for keys avoids most of that.
So you might pay them, say, $500 or $1,000 now.
To avoid potentially thousands in legal costs, plus several months of lost rent while the eviction drags through the courts. It gets you the property back faster so you can clean it up and re-rent it sooner.
It's a calculation then. Cost of eviction versus cost of cash for keys.
Precisely. Which path gets you back to generating income faster and cheaper overall? It's a pragmatic option the guide suggests seriously considering.
All right. But what if none of that works? You've checked the lease, know the laws, communicated, sent the notice. A payment plan isn't happening. Cash for keys is rejected or not appropriate. The tenant isn't paying, isn't leaving. What's the guide say is the unavoidable next step?
Step 6. Begin the formal eviction process. This is when other options are exhausted.
And what does that typically look like, according to the guide?
It usually starts with filing the correct legal paperwork with your local court. There are things involved, of course. Then you have to formally serve the tenant with the court documents.
Meaning officially deliver them according to legal rules.
Right. Then you'll likely have a court hearing where you present your case, why the tenant should be evicted based on the lease and the law. If the judge rules in your favor,
Then they just leave.
hopefully. But if they still refuse, the guide notes you may need to involve local law enforcement, like the sheriff's department, to actually enforce the court order and physically remove them.
That sounds intense and complicated.
It really can be, which leads to a very strong recommendation in the guide at this point.
Yep.
Seriously, consider hiring an eviction lawyer.
Why? Can't you handle it yourself?
You might be able to, but the legal process can be a minefield of technicalities. An experienced local attorney knows the specific court procedures, the deadlines, the exact forms needed. They can prevent you from making a mistake that gets your case dismissed. The guide suggests it's often money well spent.
And there was one piece of advice the guide really stressed if you reach this eviction stage.
Oh yeah, hammer it at home. Document everything,
Yeah.
every single interaction, every notice, every payment attempt.
Why is that documentation so critical?
Because it's your evidence. The guide explains this is what you or your lawyer will use in court. Copies of the lease, the late notices, certified mail receipts, detailed payment ledgers showing what's owed, records of calls, emails,
All of it.
all of it. It proves you followed the lease terms, followed the law, and have grounds for the eviction. Without solid documentation, the guide warns, winning can be much harder, even if you're in the right.
Makes sense. It shifts documentation from just paperwork to, like, building your case file. Okay, so you're in the legal process. What else does the guide say to think about for protection?
Step 7. Landlord insurance. Now, everyone knows you need it, but the guide highlights a crucial detail.
Which is?
Your standard landlord policy probably does not cover lost rent if a tenant stops paying.
Oh, that's important. So if that's a big fear, standard insurance isn't the safety net you think it is?
For lost rent, usually not. The guide talks about something called rent guarantee insurance. It might be an add-on or a separate policy.
And what does that cover?
Based on the source, it can potentially cover some or all of the unpaid rent for a limited time. Sometimes helps with the legal fees for eviction, and might even cover property damage related to the eviction.
So it's something definitely worth asking your insurance agent about.
Absolutely. The guide advises you to check your policy carefully and specifically inquire about rent guarantee or rent default coverage if that risk worries you.
Now, step 8 in the guide is a huge warning, a major don't.
A massive one. Step 8. Do not touch the tenant's personal belongings, even if you've won in court.
Why is this so forbidden?
Because doing things yourself, changing the locks while they're out, turning off utilities, moving their stuff to the curb, that's called self-help eviction. The guide states clearly it's illegal in most places.
And the consequences for the landlord.
Severe. The guide warns you could face lawsuits from the tenant for illegal eviction, wrongful removal of property, damages. It can get very messy and expensive.
So what's the legal way to handle their stuff if they leave it behind after an eviction?
Once you have the court order in possession, the guide says local law enforcement, the sheriff, usually handles the actual removal according to very specific local procedures for abandoned property. You, the landlord, stay out of it. Follow the official process.
Even if it's frustrating and slow.
Especially then. Sticking to the letter of the law protects you.
Okay, so let's say you've navigated the process, maybe even eviction, and you finally have your property back. What's the guide's final step, looking ahead?
Step 9 is about prevention. Screen future tenants more thoroughly. The guide frames this as the lesson many landlords learn the hard way.
Tighten things up on the front end.
Exactly. Implement a really detailed, consistent screening process for every applicant.
What does that involve, according to the guide?
Going beyond just a credit score. The source recommends digging into their actual payment history with previous landlords. Get proof of income pay stubs, bank statements to verify they can genuinely afford the rent. And crucially, call those references. Don't just take the application at face value. Ask specific questions.
So it's about raising your standards and doing more homework up front.
Precisely. The guide suggests that maybe being a bit tougher in screening can save you enormous pain later. Trust needs to be earned by the applicant showing reliability.
The guide also touched on what to do right after you get the property back and the importance of tracking payments generally.
Yeah, good point. Once you regain possession, inspect immediately. Document any damages, thoroughly photos, videos, notes, comparing it to your move-in records. Change the locks right away.
And if belongings are left.
Handle them strictly according to your local abandoned property laws. Again, the guide repeats. Don't just toss things out. Follow the procedure. Then clean up, figure out recovering unpaid rent or damages legally, and start screening for a new, reliable tenant ASAP to minimize vacancy.
And that ongoing payment tracking, it's not just for catching late payers.
No, the guide highlights its broader value. Consistent tracking helps you spot issues early, apply fees correctly, and start the notice process promptly if needed. But it's also invaluable evidence if you do end up needing to evict someone later. It shows the history.
And useful for deciding on renewals too, I guess.
Absolutely. The guide mentions using property management software or online tools to make this easier. Tracking, alerts, records. Knowing a tenant's payment reliability helps you make informed decisions about lease renewals, rent increases. It's all data-driven.
Okay, we've walked through the whole process from when the rent stops. If you had to boil down the absolute must-remember takeaways from this guide for landlords facing this, what would they be?
I think the core message is, stay calm, be methodical, and know the rules. So first, don't panic. Take measured, legal steps. Second, start with communication, then move to formal written notices. Third, know your specific local laws and your lease inside out. Fourth, consider pragmatic options like payment plans or cash for keys if they make sense. Fifth, use formal eviction only as the necessary last resort. Sixth, proactively fix any vagueness in your lease now. And seventh, invest wisely in the right insurance and, crucially, in rigorous tenant screening up front.
It really reframes it, doesn't it? From feeling helpless when rent stops to feeling equipped with a process.
Exactly. It gives you a playbook for a tough situation, helping you protect your business while staying on the right side of the law.
And the guide kind of leaves you with this thought, yeah, being a landlord has its challenges, unpaid rent being a big one, but having the right process puts you in control. It makes you think. If you're a landlord listening, what part of this process feels the most intimidating? Or maybe which step feels most empowering now that you've heard it laid out? And how could implementing some of these steps before there's a problem, really solidifying your lease, tightening your screening change, how you manage your properties going forward, something to definitely chew on.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Keys to Success. I invite you to check out past episodes and follow us on your favorite podcast platform to get notified when new ones are released. And when you're ready to simplify managing your properties, be sure to visit us at www.payrent.com.